Thanks, Ian. So I'd like to tell you a story about these two people right here. This person in the middle, this is Professor Smith. She's a university professor. The person in the lower left-hand corner, his name is John. John is one of Professor Smith's students. Now, I want to tell you this story. Before I do, I want to promise you two things. Number one, there's a happy ending to this story, so if it gets scary in the middle, don't worry. And number two, I am not at all going to talk about my artistic ability. Right? Okay, so first let's start talking about Professor Smith. Professor Smith works at a university. She's well respected by her peers. She does a lot of important research. She's also well respected by her students. She challenges them. She respects them. So she spends a lot of time doing teaching and research. This is her job. And she does a really very good job at it. But it's also a very taxing job. She's a very busy person. She's applying for grants. She's preparing for her courses. She's grading papers. She's supervising research assistants. It keeps her very, very busy. It's a stressful job. She also has a family she loves very much. The most important thing in the world to her. She wants to spend as much time as possible with them. So as you can see, the biggest stressor for Professor Smith is time. Right? Okay, so that's Professor Smith. Now her student's name is John. John is the first in his family to attend college. He wants to be an engineer. Maybe an engineer that creates robots to help people walk. But paying for college has been rather stressful for him. He comes from a low-income family. They do a lot for him. They sacrifice a lot to get him into school, get him through school, to get him in college, to pay for it. But they also know that it's worth it, that it's going to pay off for him in his future. John also has a part-time job. He works in a restaurant just off campus. But the majority of how he pays for school is student loans. He has thousands and thousands of dollars worth of student loans. Is that familiar to anyone here? In fact, in the United States, there is over $1 trillion of outstanding student loans right now, student debt. Compare that to credit card debt in the United States, only $850 billion. Student loan debt is higher than credit card debt. Can you believe that? And it's increasing by $250 billion every day. So John needs to be really careful with how he spends his money. He lives at home in their apartment. This is how he gets around town. This is where he shops for clothes. This is what he eats, right? Is this familiar to anybody here? Yes. So you can see that the biggest stressor for John is money, right? Okay, so now we know these characters pretty well, and they should be somewhat familiar, I think. Let's take a look into how they prepare for the upcoming semester. So Professor Smith needs to, one thing she needs to do to prepare for the class is she needs to choose a textbook. Textbooks are actually a really important part of a lot of courses. They're a very efficient way for both the instructor and the students to access this content. It's organized well. It's a mainstay of a lot of courses in any university. And she chooses textbooks based mainly on their quality. They have to be good, right? They have to be accurate. They have to be up to date. They have to meet the needs of her students. She doesn't have a lot of time, right? So how does she, and there are a lot of textbooks out there. She can't read each one front to back, cover to cover. So she relies a lot on her peers to suggest to her textbooks that they think might work. So she can narrow it down a little bit and then use that expertise of her peers, other faculty, to judge the quality. Then she looks at them and she can make the decision. So Professor Smith, for her class, she selected these 2 textbooks. She says she's not thrilled about either one of them, but they'll be okay. The one on the left, it's missing several concepts that she knows are really important to her students. And the one on the right, it actually has 5 chapters in it that she doesn't even plan on covering. So neither one of them are ideal or perfect, but they'll do the job. She looks at the price of these textbooks, and she doesn't like that. She does not like the fact that her choice of textbooks will be kind of burdening students financially that much. Right? So she says either one will work, so she chooses the one that's least burdensome. So now let's talk about John as he prepares for the semester. John takes a trip to the bookstore. This stresses John out a little bit, right? The cost of this textbook. Even though she did everything she could, right, to kind of keep the cost down for him. Keep in mind, this isn't his only class. He has 4 classes. They each have at least 1 required textbook. And so the numbers add up quickly. In fact, in the United States, students can expect to pay about $1,200 a year in course material costs, according to the College Board. So John's a little put in a spot here. He needs to figure out what to do. But he isn't happy about this. And neither are his classmates. And let's hear from a few of them here.
I think they're really valuable, but the cost is just a little too much for students who are already paying a lot for tuition.
Find a way to make costs more manageable because tuition's going up, everything's going up, cost of living's going up, and textbooks are going up.
There is definitely a value to them, but maybe not for the cost that we pay for them.
I mean, I guess professors are trying to provide students with books that are reasonable, but I mean, there are some textbooks that are just they're just way too pricey.
Just feel like they're really overpriced. Yeah.
I get frustrated when you have to buy a book that's expensive that you don't use.
Textbooks are only used for so long before you're done with them, so it's like you're going to use it for a couple months and then probably never touch it again.
If people weren't just issuing new editions and just increasing prices, rather stick to what you have.
It's kind of expensive, and sometimes I feel like I have to buy the textbook because as it's required. But it does kind of suck to throw away so much money on something that you only use for a semester.
They should keep the same textbook for several years because the material doesn't change that much.
I have purchased them and I don't use them, which is kind of frustrating.
I think it's outrageous, actually. Yeah, it costs way too much in general.
So John does have a few choices that he can make to help keep the costs down. And so he looks into them. Number one, he could look at used textbooks. And used textbooks do cost less than new textbooks generally. But they're still expensive. And many times publishers come out with new editions every few years. And in this case, Professor Smith, the book that she found was a new edition. And so the used textbook, which is a year old, isn't going to work. You can rent textbooks. Renting a textbook costs less than buying a full textbook, but it's still expensive. And when you're done, at the end of the semester, you give it back, right? You're renting it. So you have nothing left, nothing to show for it, at least physically, when you're done. An electronic textbook. This is becoming more and more popular, and they also cost generally less than a new printed textbook. But they're also generally a leased model as well, in that at the end of the semester you lose access to the content as a student. And in addition, some students, and John's one of them, prefer print. They feel that they can study better, they're just more comfortable with a print textbook. So he looked into those options, and none of them really seemed great. There's one more option, though. And it's an option that, unfortunately, too many students are put in the position of making, and that's to go without. Or to go without as long as possible, just to see whether you actually need it or not. Is that a familiar story here? Here's some of John's classmates again.
Wait until I feel like there's a need in the class to buy the textbook, or if I'm falling behind and I can't find another resource for free online that would also give me that information. And then I'll buy a textbook.
But I haven't really purchasing a textbook until it was completely necessary to have it.
Yes, I have. Unfortunately, I had some troubles because of it. Textbooks are obviously something that you really obviously need in order to do well in a class. You know, you need to have that textbook, and because it costs so much, I think a lot of people have problems getting the required text, and therefore they struggle with classes they shouldn't necessarily struggle in.
And in a national survey by the U.S. student public interest research groups, they showed that 7 out of 10 students surveyed said that sometime during their academic career they did exactly that. They did not purchase a textbook, a required textbook, because of the cost. Now, no one intentionally is putting students in this position of having to choose between financial burden and academic success, but it's where we are. Certainly, Professor Smith doesn't want her students to be in that position. So, what do we need to do here? What would be ideal? Well, ideally we'd have a textbook that Professor Smith could take things out of and put things in, remove chapters, put in her own content. And then ideally, this textbook wouldn't cost very much at all, if anything. Okay, well that's a dream, right? That couldn't ever exist, could it? Well, let me tell you about open textbooks. Open textbooks are just textbooks, just like any other textbook. They can be print, they can be digital. The difference is that the copyright holder of the textbook, the copyright holder chooses to release the textbook with this license on it. And what this license says to people is, the copyright owner is saying, I made this, but you can take it and mold it to your own needs, take things out, put things in, edit it, change it to best meet the needs of your students. And guess what? You can give it away for free. Okay, now why would someone ever write a textbook like that? That's a whole nother talk. But let me assure you they exist. This license is called a Creative Commons license. It's the same license that TED Talk videos are released with. Now there are different variations, but my synopsis is generally it. It's open. The content they attach to is open. So Professor Smith, now that she's aware that these things exist, is saying, okay, so what do I do? Where do I go? And what we find with faculty is when they're aware of these open textbooks is that we've found that there are a couple of barriers still in the way. They have no idea where to find them, number one. They kind of have grown in different places. You can find them on the internet if you look, but she doesn't have time to look, does she? And then the other thing, which is most important to her, is are these any good? What's the quality like? Obviously, if they're free but they're garbage, no one wants to use them, nor should they. Right? So in the College of Education and Human Development here at the University of Minnesota, what we've done is scoured the internet for open textbooks. We've gone out and looked for them and cataloged them. So now there's only one place to look. And now we've also started collecting reviews from faculty. So, because remember how Professor Smith learned about the quality of the textbooks? She relied on her peers, didn't she? So we want to set up that same thing here, in that she can now come to one place, look for the textbook that she likes, and look to see how her peers rated it. And then she can make her own judgments about whether it's good enough for her students and fits their needs. So Professor Smith did just that. She found a textbook. It met her needs. She especially liked the fact that she could take things out, put things in, because it wasn't quite perfect when she found it. And of course, course, John likes the fact that it's not going to burden him with this financial burden. He can now focus, instead of focusing on trying to figure out how to pay for his education, he can actually focus on his education. Right? So, this sounds really nice, doesn't it? Is this for real? Can it really happen? It is happening. It's happening all over the country. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of faculty who have already adopted open textbooks. And as a very small example, in the College of Education and Human Development here at the University of Minnesota, as a very small pilot group of 10 faculty did find some textbooks, open textbooks from the catalog that they thought were good. And they adopted them and used them in their class this year, this academic year. And in 1 year, they saved their students almost $100,000, potentially $100,000 in textbook costs. So this isn't a fantasy stickman, fantasy world here we're talking about. This is real, and it's happening now. And what can we do to move this forward? If you're a student, talk to your instructors. Encourage them to look. Just encourage them to look, right? None of us want them to find something they don't like and try to use it. Just encourage them to look. If you're a faculty member, explore this catalog we've created and try to find, see if there is something that'll work for you and for your students. And if you do find something, adopt. Because all of us want our students to be successful. Thank you very much.